and he might be one and done. That brings you to where the Bengals could possibly pick up a tight end in the later rounds. And Paul Daniel Jr. was saying, I think it was when you were on the show with him. I can't remember, but he was saying that a lot of these elite tight ends they have now were not the first tight end taken in the draft. They were the second, third, not round, just tight end overall taken. Now, my question is, where do you see the tight end class, ranking 1 to 2, and where do you think maybe the Bengals might be able to pick up a good one in the, maybe third, fourth round, somewhere in there?
This is a great tight end class. There isn't the meat that you have at the top, right? There's no Kyle Pitts in this class, and there isn't even really a Noah Fant in this class, a guy that you can really, really rely on as being that lead receiving option. And I don't think any of these guys are going to contribute immediately out the gate. Most tight ends don't. So if you guys do draft a tight end, don't worry if their rookie year isn't that great. That's normal, right? That's every other tight end in the universe not named Pitts.
Right.
But I really do like this tight end class. I think it's a very talented one. There's a lot of really good guys. We already talked about Jelani Woods. Daniel Bellinger is finally starting to get some steam. He had one of the best combines of any player there. If it wasn't for Jelani Woods, Daniel Bellinger would be the guy that everybody was talking about. We also have Andrew Ogletree out of Youngstown State, who's a much more athletic tight end than a lot of people had considered. I think he's got a shot to come in that 5th to 7th round, the day 3 type. A guy that I didn't expect to be talking about as much was Charlie Kolar out of Iowa State. Charlie Kolar did not look like a player who was going to test well. And then he did. He tested out with a 9.11 RAS out of 10, which is phenomenal, especially for a guy that people were like, I wouldn't expect him to even hit 5. And then he has over 9. That's crazy. So you go back to his tape and you wonder, why does he look a little bit sluggish? Sometimes it's just the offensive scheme. And you gotta really figure out what they're being asked to do, because they're not asked to go flying up the seam. Then they don't need to fly up the seam. They don't need to show you that speed and explosiveness as much. Peyton Hendershot out of Indiana is another guy I think that could get some play in the later rounds. Trey McBride, though, is my number one and has been for pretty much the entire period. One of the big questions about him was whether or not he had the speed to match up with NFL defenders. Mm-hmm. He ran a 4.56 at his pro day. Plenty fast enough, way faster than anybody expected, I think. Really did himself a lot of favors and pushed himself up some draft boards. And my favorite tight end actually didn't even test well. And this is where I get to talk about when you go against your own numbers, right? Mm-hmm. When do you look at your own math,
right,
and question it? And then we get Isaiah Likely. I didn't expect Isaiah Likely to test poorly. He did. Right. He didn't run a very good 40. His agility drills were poor. He had great explosive drills, which didn't surprise me at all. But it's just not a good resume to have, right? There's no good track record for tight ends who didn't test well. Every other position in the NFL, I can give you offhand a player that I know of off the top of my head who found success in the NFL and didn't test well. And I can usually tell you why I think that is, why I think that they were able to find some success where most guys who test poorly aren't able to. I don't have that success story at tight end. So I can't sit here and be like, well, this is the guy I think he could model his game after. This is how I think he could win. I don't have that at tight end because that player just doesn't exist.
Right.
So I wish there was. But if there was a player I think is going to buck a trend, it would be Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina. I really love his tape. That explosiveness is where he wins, and he tested fantastic there. I wish he had tested better in the other drills, but I'm not going to say I'm confident. I'm hopeful that he's able to be the guy that bucks that trend.
Yeah, hey, maybe we'll get lucky and he'll be there for the Bengals. We can draft him and we get a diamond in the rough. Now, did you mention and I can't name slips my mind again. There's so many names bobbling in my head. But the tight end out of Ohio State who hurt himself on the Senior Bowl.
Jeremy Ruckert.
Thank you. Yes, Ruckert. Yes. Now, my personal opinion is, I think he's a better receiver than he got a chance to do at Ohio State because of the great wide receivers that Ohio State have. And I know he didn't get to do any of the testing. And basically, that foot injury knocked him out of everything. So I know it's really hurt him. So that's a guy. How can you evaluate him? Because it looks like he could be a good receiver, but he didn't really get to show it that much in Ohio State. And now he hasn't been able to really test basically at all. So how do you go about evaluating a guy like that?
You got to take the math hat off, and you got to put your evaluator hat back on. In my case, they're both bowlers.
I like him. I like it.
But you've got to just really trust what you're seeing on the tape. You know, I mentioned before, the testing is supposed to confirm what you're seeing about a player on tape. You don't have that option if a player is injured and unable to test.
Right.
Joe Burrow didn't test. We were still able to tell that he was an athletic player. We knew what he was able to do on the football field with his legs. We didn't have to question whether or not he was athletic. Lamar Jackson didn't test. Kyler Murray didn't test. Lots of guys don't test, and we're able to still tell they're pretty athletic. That's not the case that we're in with Jeremy Ruckert.
Right.
Because even though he looks pretty athletic, he doesn't look like a great athlete. He doesn't look like that elite tier athlete that you want playing every Sunday. So do you think that he's good enough at everything to be able to be successful in the NFL? What really works in his favor, though, is that Jeremy Ruckert doesn't look like he's a bad anything.
Right.
He's not a bad blocker.
Right.
He isn't slow. He's not agile. He's not inexplosive. So he doesn't look like he has any significant weaknesses to his game. And everything that he does at least okay. So is there a role for him in the NFL? Absolutely. Is he going to be a number one tight end? That's where you got to really trust what you're watching on tape.
Yeah, and that's where I think the Bengals are in a good spot because they have Hayden Hurst. So if you can take a tight end that could take a year, like you just said, it takes a year or two sometimes to get a tight end to where he's is comfortable and in the system. Everything. I mean, for instance, look at CJ Uzama. I mean, his best year was last year for us, and I think that was his fifth year here. Yeah. So it does take a little while sometimes. So hopefully the Bengals can actually get a guy because I do think they're going to try to address the tight end position because, like I said, Hayden Hurst isn't here that long, and we have Drew Sample, who we've seen what Drew Sample is. Drew Sample is a very good blocker, not much of a receiver, so that's where I think they could go there. Now, let's bring you to